The folder opened to a white screen so empty that, for 3 full seconds, nobody understood what they were looking at. No title page.
No diagrams. No methodology.
No budget model. Not even the color-coded index my group had spent 6 weeks pretending they had designed. Just one gray line beneath the folder name. This folder contains no files. I was sitting in the second row of the examination theater with my hands folded over my lap, wearing the navy dress I had bought for my own presentation, while 4 people who had called me paranoid, selfish, unstable, and replaceable stood under the projector lights in front of every examiner in the faculty. Their leader, Sienna Vale, clicked the refresh button once, then twice. Then so rapidly the cursor began jumping. Behind her, the external examiner leaned toward the screen. Our course coordinator removed his glasses. A visiting industry assessor glanced at the printed rubric, then at the 4 students, then back at the empty folder. Sienna turned around and searched the audience until she found me. The expression on her face was not fear yet. It was outrage, hot and immediate, as if I had broken into her home and taken something that belonged to her. She mouthed my name. I smiled. Not because I was cruel. Not because I enjoyed watching people fail. I smiled because in my first life, that exact projector had displayed my work while my name was missing from every page, and I had been the one standing beneath it with no proof, no voice, and no future. This time, I had withdrawn from the group 48 hours earlier. This time, the folder they had stolen was exactly what they deserved. Nothing. 6 months before that white screen, I died in a way nobody would have called dramatic. There was no screeching car, no hospital monitor, no last confession. I simply stopped being the person I had been. In that first life, our capstone project was supposed to determine whether we graduated from the Master of Urban Resilience program. The assignment was enormous. Design a complete emergency shelter system for a flood-prone regional town, including site analysis, modular structures, transport logistics, energy modeling, evacuation routes, community consultation, financial projections, and a live defense before a panel of academics and engineers. We were placed into groups of 5. I was assigned to Sienna, Caleb, Priya, and Jonah. On paper, it looked balanced. Sienna was confident and polished. Caleb claimed he was good with modeling software. Priya had experience in community engagement. Jonah knew how to talk his way through any presentation. I was the quiet one with the scholarship, the highest technical marks, and the inconvenient habit of noticing when numbers did not add up. During our first meeting, Sienna clasped her hands and said, "We should divide this according to strengths." Then she assigned herself project leadership and integration, which meant she would supervise everyone while producing nothing measurable. Caleb took structural modeling, Priya took stakeholder research, Jonah took visual communication, and I was given logistics, budgeting, risk analysis, sustainability, mapping, references, document formatting, and anything that falls between the cracks. They laughed when Sienna said that last part. I laughed too. That was my first mistake. My second was believing that being indispensable would make me safe. Within 3 weeks, I had become the project. Caleb's structural model crashed because he had never used the software beyond a first-year tutorial, so I rebuilt it. Priya copied community survey results from an unrelated council report and changed the town name, so I conducted new interviews, transcribed them, and rewrote the analysis. Jonah made 12 glossy slides full of stock photos but no data, so I turned my technical report into diagrams he could understand. Sienna held meetings where she spoke for 40 minutes about cohesion and professional standards, then messaged me at midnight asking whether I could fix another section before morning. Every task arrived disguised as a small favor. Could I check the calculations? Could I clean up the references? Could I merge everyone's documents? Could I make a backup folder just in case? By mid-semester, I was sleeping 4 hours a night and eating instant noodles over my keyboard while the others posted photos from bars with captions about surviving capstone season. When I asked them to contribute, Sienna did not refuse directly. She was too clever for that. She would tilt her head and say, "We all have different working styles, Elena. You can't expect everyone to operate at your intensity." Then Jonah would add, "You chose to redo things. Nobody asked you to be a perfectionist." That sentence became their shield. Every time I repaired something they had broken, they treated the repair as evidence that I was controlling. The first time they removed my name, it was almost subtle. I opened the master document and found the authorship table revised. Sienna was listed as project lead and principal researcher. Caleb was structural design lead. Priya was consultation lead. Jonah was visual systems lead. Beside my name, instead of technical integration lead, it said documentation support. I stared at the words until they blurred. I had built the spatial database, generated every flood risk map, written the cost model, calculated transport capacity, and designed the shelter deployment sequence that formed the entire logic of our proposal. Documentation support made me sound like I had corrected spelling. I restored the earlier version and messaged the group, asking who had changed it. Sienna replied within a minute. That table reflects presentation roles, not total effort. Please stop editing locked sections without discussing it. I reminded her that I had created the document. Caleb sent a laughing emoji. Jonah wrote, "This is getting intense." Priya remained silent. The next morning, they held a meeting without me. By lunchtime, Sienna emailed our coordinator saying the group was concerned about my increasingly possessive behavior around shared materials. I did not know about that email until it was too late. The final betrayal in my first life happened 72 hours before the defense. I opened the shared drive and discovered that my editing access had been removed. Every file I had created was still there, but I could only view them. Sienna told me it was an accidental permissions issue. Caleb said he would fix it. Nobody did. The next day, the entire folder disappeared from my account. When I confronted them in the library, Sienna looked genuinely offended. "You said you were thinking of leaving the group," she said loudly enough for nearby students to hear. "We had to protect the submission." I had never said that. I had said I could not continue doing 5 people's work. Jonah folded his arms. Priya stared at the table. Caleb told me not to make a scene. I went straight to the coordinator. But Sienna had already sent screenshots of selected messages, cropped to make my requests for work look like threats. She claimed I had withheld files, created duplicate folders, and tried to sabotage the team. The coordinator told us to resolve the conflict professionally and present together. I asked whether my authorship would be acknowledged. He said the assessment was collective. I asked whether version history could be reviewed. He said there was no time before the defense. Then he gave me the advice that buried me. Focus on getting through the presentation. We can discuss contribution disputes afterward. So I got through it. I stood beneath that same projector while Sienna introduced the project as the result of our collaborative leadership model. Jonah presented my deployment diagrams. Caleb explained my structural calculations incorrectly, then recovered by reading my notes from the presenter view. Priya described the interviews I had conducted as our fieldwork. When my turn arrived, the slide deck jumped past my section. Sienna apologized to the panel and said we had made last-minute adjustments. I tried to speak anyway. The external examiner asked me which component I had led. Before I could answer, Sienna said, "Elena supported integration across the document." Documentation support, spoken aloud. I felt the room close around me. Afterward, the panel praised the project but noted uneven confidence among presenters. The group received a distinction. I received an individual fail because my peers unanimously rated my contribution as minimal and disruptive. Their confidential evaluations said I had missed meetings, refused tasks, and created tension. The appeal took 4 months. By then, my graduate job offer had been withdrawn. My scholarship provider demanded repayment. The university eventually acknowledged that version history showed I had produced most of the work, but they called the process procedurally unfortunate rather than fraudulent. The mark was amended too late for the intake I had lost. I stopped answering friends. I stopped opening my laptop. One rainy night, after reading an email from Sienna announcing that she had been hired by the engineering consultancy that had examined our project, I lay down fully dressed and wished with such concentration that I could return to the first meeting that my whole body seemed to fold inward. When I opened my eyes, Sienna was saying, "We should divide this according to strengths." The seminar room smelled of whiteboard marker and burnt coffee. Caleb was tapping a pen against his notebook. Priya was scrolling on her phone. Jonah was grinning at me as though we had never met. On the wall, the date read February 17th, 6 months before the final defense. For a moment, I could not breathe. I touched my face, my hair, the pulse in my throat. My laptop sat unopened in front of me. The scholarship was still active. My job offer did not yet exist. Sienna leaned closer.
Elena?
Are you okay? In my first life, I had nodded and accepted 8 separate responsibilities before the meeting ended. In my second, I smiled and said, perfectly. I'm just writing down exactly who agrees to do what. Then I opened a new document, projected it onto the wall, and created a task register with names, deadlines, and measurable outputs. The room changed. Not dramatically.
No Sander.
No music. Just a fraction of stiffness in Sienna's smile. We don't need to make this bureaucratic, she said. It's not bureaucratic, I replied. It's collaborative. Jonah laughed, but this time I did not join him. I assigned myself logistics and risk modeling only. When Sienna tried to add budgeting, references, and integration, I typed those tasks under her name. She stared at the screen. Caleb stopped tapping his pen. I had learned something in my first life. People who exploit generosity are often most offended by records. From that day forward, I documented everything. I recorded meeting minutes and emailed them immediately after each session. I store my files in a private drive, uploaded watermarked previews to the shared folder, and retained local copies with automatic version history. I asked questions in writing. When Caleb said he would finish the structural model by Friday, I replied, confirmed. Caleb will upload the complete load analysis by 5 p.m. Friday. When Sienna asked me privately to just run his numbers because you're faster, I answered in the group channel. Happy to review once Caleb completes his assigned analysis. When Priya suggested reusing council interview data, I linked the academic integrity policy and asked her to confirm whether she had permission. She suddenly decided original interviews were better. Jonah complained that my diagrams were not visually exciting, so I sent him the raw data and asked him to create his own visual system. 3 days later, he returned with a color palette and nothing else. The pattern repeated, but it no longer remained invisible. Their missed deadlines accumulated like fingerprints. Every excuse had a timestamp. Every request for rescue had witnesses. Yet I still did not reveal what I remembered. Revenge announced too early becomes a warning. I needed them comfortable enough to behave exactly as they had before. Sienna adapted first. She stopped asking me for favors and began manufacturing emergencies. A file would be corrupted the night before a review. A reference manager would randomly delete Priya's citations. Caleb's model would produce impossible loads 10 minutes before a tutorial. Jonah's laptop would fail whenever slides were due. Each crisis arrived with the same unspoken expectation. Elena would save the project because Elena could not tolerate bad work. In my first life, that had been true. In my second, I learned to tolerate consequences. When Caleb uploaded a model showing a shelter roof that would collapse under moderate rainfall, I did not rebuild it. I wrote 3 comments identifying the errors and submitted the section for formative feedback. Our tutor dismantled it in front of the class. Caleb's ears turned red. Sienna tried to say the model was an early draft, but the task register showed it was marked complete. When Priya arrived without interview transcripts, I presented only my risk section and let her explain the absence. When Jonah's slides contained fake statistics, I asked him during rehearsal which source supported them. He could not answer. The group began to hate the register. They called it hostile, inflexible, and not in the spirit of teamwork. I called it accurate. The first major interruption came in week 7, when Dr. Farah Nasser asked me to stay behind after studio. She was not our coordinator. She taught systems ethics and had a reputation for noticing what students hoped professors would miss. She waited until the others left, then turned my printed risk matrix around and pointed to the metadata line at the bottom. Why does every section in this project appear to originate from your account? She asked. I gave the answer I had rehearsed for months in my first life. Because we used my templates, because I was integrating drafts, because teamwork was messy. But those excuses belonged to the woman who had died. I looked at Dr. Farah and said, because most of the finished work is mine. She did not gasp or immediately promise justice. She asked for evidence. That was why I trusted her. I showed her the register, meeting minutes, version logs, and messages. She read in silence, occasionally scrolling backward to compare dates. When she finished, she said, "You understand that carrying them protects them." I told her I did. Then why are you still doing it? That question struck harder than any accusation. I had imagined my second life as a clean revenge. Document their failures, refuse to rescue them, expose the truth. Yet I was still producing a project designed to succeed, still checking the boundaries of their sections, still making sure my own components could support theirs. Somewhere beneath my anger, I remained terrified of a low mark. They had trained that fear into a leash. Dr. Farah tapped the register. A record is useful, Elena. But a record does not create a boundary. You do. That night, I made 2 folders. The first was the official shared workspace required by the group contract. It contained the task register, meeting minutes, and whatever each member uploaded under their own name. I stopped integrating anything there. The second was private. I called it Orchid, after the cheap purple flower my mother had placed beside my laptop during the appeal in my first life. Orchid contained my real work, a complete emergency shelter proposal built only from components I could independently defend. I redesigned the logistics model so it no longer relied on Caleb's unsafe structure. I created my own modular unit, ran energy simulations, developed transport routes, cost of materials, mapped evacuation zones, and documented every source. I did not do this to save the group. I did it because Dr. Farah had quietly shown me a clause in the Capstone Handbook, where documented group dysfunction threatened fair assessment. A student could request separation and submit an individually attributable project, provided the work met the learning outcomes. The clause was buried beneath 3 pages of mediation procedures and had not been mentioned in orientation. In my first life, I never found it. In my second, I read it until I knew every word. Separation required evidence, an independent deliverable, and approval from the program chair. It also required discretion while the request was reviewed. I began building my exit without telling anyone. Meanwhile, the official project decayed. Sienna continued holding leadership meetings, but now her language grew sharper. She accused Caleb of embarrassing the team after his failed model review. She told Priya her interview questions lacked depth. She called Jonah's slides juvenile. In my first life, she had directed all frustration toward me because I absorbed it and fixed the result. Without that outlet, the group turned inward. Caleb began missing meetings. Priya stopped answering after 6 in the evening. Jonah started keeping screenshots of Sienna's messages. Their alliance was not friendship. It was a temporary arrangement held together by access to my labor. Once that labor disappeared, every crack widened. Still, they remained confident. Their confidence came from a misunderstanding. They believed I was bluffing. They assumed that no matter how angry I became, I would never allow my grade to collapse beside theirs. Sienna said as much during a meeting in week 9. "We need to stop acting like separate contractors," she declared. At the end of the day, Elena's logistics only work if the whole project works, so she has as much incentive as anyone to ensure integration. She looked directly at me as she said it. The others relaxed. There it was, the old trap, spoken plainly. They thought my fear of collective failure guaranteed my obedience. I closed my notebook and said, that would be true if I remained collectively assessed. Sienna's smile froze for less than a second. Then she laughed. What does that mean? It means everyone should complete their assigned work. I did not elaborate. A threat becomes less powerful when explained. Uncertainty did more damage. 2 days later, they created a second group chat without me. I knew because Jonah accidentally sent a message to the original one. Don't worry, once she uploads the final master we can lock her out like we discussed. He deleted it within 8 seconds. 8 seconds was enough. I captured the notification on my laptop and phone. Silence followed. Then Jonah wrote, "Wrong chat, sorry." I replied, "Understood." Sienna called me immediately. I let it ring. She called again. Then Caleb. Then Priya. Finally, Sienna posted. That message was about version control, not excluding anyone. Jonah phrased it badly. I still did not answer. 5 minutes later, the task register began changing. Sienna marked 3 of her overdue integration tasks complete. Caleb uploaded a blank file named Final Structural Model. Priya added links to interview recordings that required access permission. Jonah uploaded a slide deck containing my watermark diagrams cropped so the watermark was partly hidden. They were not correcting the project. They were constructing the appearance of contribution because they realized I might use the record against them. That evening, Sienna sent a long message about trust. She said she was worried I was misinterpreting normal team decisions through a lens of hostility. She reminded me that future employers valued collaboration. She suggested we meet privately, without formal notes, to clear the air. I forwarded the message to my evidence folder and responded, "I'm available during our scheduled recorded meeting." The private chat screenshot accelerated my separation request. Dr. Farah helped me organize the evidence, but she refused to write the complaint for me. "Your case is strongest when your own voice is precise," she said. So, I wrote without emotion. I did not call them lazy, dishonest, or cruel. I listed deliverables, dates, messages, missing work, and unauthorized use of my drafts. I explained that the group had discussed removing my access after obtaining the final master file. I attached a comparison showing how my watermark diagrams had been cropped for Jonah's slides. I included the original authorship table and Sienna's revision, reducing my role to documentation support. Most importantly, I submitted the ORCID project at 60% completion, proving I could meet the assessment outcomes independently. The program chair, Professor Hale, called me into his office. In my first life, he had been the coordinator who told me to get through the presentation and complain afterward. Seeing him again made my palms sweat. He read my request, removed his glasses, and sighed. For one terrible second, I was back in that first timeline, powerless under fluorescent lights. "Group conflict is expected in Capstone," he began. My heart dropped. Then I interrupted him. I had never interrupted a professor before. "Conflict is expected. Planned exclusion after appropriation of work is not." His eyebrows rose. I slid Jonah's deleted message across the desk. "I am not asking you to judge personalities. I am asking for assessment separation under Clause 8.4, based on attributable work and documented risk to fair evaluation." The room went still. Professor Hale looked from the screenshot to the handbook clause I had printed. He could dismiss a distressed student. He could not easily dismiss his own policy. He gave the group one final mediation opportunity. I expected it because the clause required it. We met in a glass conference room with Professor Hale and a faculty administrator. Sienna arrived wearing cream trousers and a blue blouse, dressed as though she were interviewing for a consultancy. Caleb looked ill. Priya carried a thick notebook she never opened. Jonah would not meet my eyes. Professor Hale stated that concerns had been raised about workload, authorship, and access. He did not identify who submitted the evidence, though everyone knew. Sienna spoke first. Her voice trembled at exactly the right places. She said the group had struggled with my communication style. She said I imposed systems nobody agreed to, refused informal collaboration, and hoarded advanced work in private files. "We're worried she intends to abandon us at the last minute," she concluded. It was almost impressive. She had turned my attempt to escape exploitation into proof of sabotage. Professor Hale asked whether the group had planned to lock me out after I uploaded a final master. Sienna looked genuinely puzzled. "Absolutely not." Jonah shifted in his chair. Professor Hale displayed the deleted message. Caleb whispered something under his breath. Priya's face changed. Sienna recovered quickly. She said Jonah had misunderstood a discussion about freezing edits before submission. Jonah nodded too fast. "That's what I meant." I could have attacked the lie. Instead, I asked one question. Why would a final master need to be uploaded by me if I have contributed only documentation support? Nobody answered. The administrator requested each member describe their completed work and produce the latest file. Caleb said his model was on another computer. Priya said her recordings were still being processed. Jonah opened his slide deck, which contained cropped versions of my diagrams. Sienna presented a project integration plan consisting of headings and colored cells. Then Professor Hale asked me. I opened Orchid. The screen filled with a functioning geospatial model of the floodplain, animated deployment routes, and a cost dashboard connected to material quantities. I showed the risk register, the independent modular design, the simulation outputs, and the interview framework I had developed without using Priya's data. I did not present the entire project. I showed enough. The atmosphere shifted. Until that moment, the dispute could be framed as 5 students arguing over credit. Orchid made the imbalance visible. Sienna stared at the screen with an expression I recognized from my first life, the look she wore whenever she saw something valuable, and immediately began deciding how to claim it. This is exactly the kind of separate work that has damaged us, she said. Elena has been developing an alternative project instead of integrating with the team. Professor Hale asked when I began it. After repeated missed deliverables, and after Dr. Nasser advised me to establish attributable work, I said. Sienna's head snapped toward Dr. Farah's empty chair. She had not known I had faculty support. Mediation ended without agreement. Professor Hale approved provisional separation, subject to final review by the assessment board. I would submit and defend Orchid individually. The remaining 4 could continue as a group using only work they had independently produced or work I explicitly licensed to them. That last condition mattered. University group work did not erase authorship. Share materials could remain shared, but my private project and any drafts not contributed to the official workspace were mine. Professor Hale instructed us to complete an asset transfer record within 5 days. Every file in the official folder had to be tagged by creator and usage permission. Sienna agreed with a calm smile. Outside the conference room, she followed me into the stairwell and dropped the performance. You think you won? She hissed. Her face was pale with fury. You built half the system around our original concept. You can't just walk away. I reminded her that the original concept, a modular flood shelter, came from the assignment brief. You used our discussions, she said. So did you, I replied. The difference is that I can prove what I made. She stepped closer. No examiner is going to reward someone who abandons her team. In my first life, those words would have terrified me. In my second, they sounded like a door closing behind me. Then you should have no trouble presenting without me, I said. For the next month, Sienna tried every route back into my work. First came friendliness. She brought me coffee and said the conflict had gone too far. She suggested I remain separated on paper, but allow the group to use my logistics model for consistency. I declined. Then came guilt. Priya messaged that everyone's graduation was at risk and asked whether I truly wanted 4 futures on my conscience. I replied that each person's assessed work remained their responsibility. Then came bargaining. Caleb offered to credit me as co-lead if I restored access to my calculations. Jonah promised to tell Professor Hale that the lockout message had been Sienna's idea. I saved the message, but did not trade. Finally came intimidation. Sienna filed a countercomplaint alleging that Orchid contained group intellectual property. An academic integrity officer compared the project history. The result was devastating for her. The audit found that my files predated the group's corresponding sections, while several of their materials reproduced my watermark drafts without attribution. The officer ordered them to remove those materials. Jonah's slide deck shrank from 46 slides to 19. Caleb's model remained unusable. Priya had 7 interviews but no analysis. Sienna had a schedule, meeting agendas, and a logo. Then, unexpectedly, Priya came to my apartment. It was nearly 10 at night, raining hard enough to blur the streetlights. When I opened the door, she looked smaller than she did at university. She held a USB drive in one hand and kept rubbing her thumb across its edge. I need to show you something, she said. I almost refused. In my first life, Priya's silence had hurt more than Sienna's attacks because she had watched everything and chosen safety. But this was not the same timeline, and I had promised myself I would respond to evidence, not memory. I let her in. She opened a folder of screenshots from the hidden group chat. There were weeks of messages. Sienna had instructed them not to upload complete work to the official drive because she believed I was building a case. She told Caleb to create placeholder files so the task register looked current. She told Jonah to crop my watermarks. She told Priya that once I completed the master folder, they would revoke my access and tell faculty I had become unstable. The exact plan from my first life had been forming again, line by line, even without my cooperation. My skin went cold as I read. Then I reached the final exchange. Sienna had written, "Elena will never actually withdraw. She needs the grade too much. Let her panic. She always fixes things at the end."
Priya whispered, "I'm sorry."
I asked whether she was giving me the screenshots because she regretted what they were doing or because the project was failing. She began to cry. "Both," she said. It was not a noble answer. It was honest. I copied the screenshots, then gave the USB drive back. Priya asked whether I would protect her name. I told her I would not expose her unnecessarily, but I would not lie if the faculty asked where the evidence came from. She nodded. Before leaving, she paused at the door and said, "Sienna still thinks you'll fill the transfer folder before the defense." Asked what transfer folder she meant. Priya looked confused. During the asset review, Sienna had demanded that I create a location where any materials I authorized for continued group use could be deposited. I had created one called Elena, approved transfer assets, and shared it with all 4 members and Professor Hale. It contained a single text document explaining that no independently authored technical files had been licensed and that the group remained free to use the meeting minutes, task register, and original materials each member had created. To me, the folder was a formal record. To Sienna, apparently, it was a promise. Priya said Sienna had built the final presentation around it. The opening slide linked to the folder. The methodology slide linked to it. The technical appendix, cost model, and design files all pointed to subfolders that did not exist. "She says you're trying to scare us," Priya whispered. "She says you'll upload everything the night before, because otherwise the panel will blame you too." I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about the certainty in that belief. Sienna did not merely expect me to rescue them. She considered rescue a law of nature. "Tell her the folder is empty," I said. Priya blinked. "She knows."
"No."
"Tell her it will remain empty." Priya's mouth tightened. "She won't believe me." That was the moment I understood that I did not need a trap. I did not need to delete files, change links, sabotage slides, or conceal information. I only needed to stop. The most devastating thing I could do to people who had built their success around my surrender was honor my own decision. The next morning, I posted in the official group channel. For clarity, following approved assessment separation, I will not upload ORCID files or other independently authored technical work to the transfer folder. The folder accurately reflects the assets licensed for group use. Please prepare your defense using your own materials. Professor Hale acknowledged the message. Priya reacted with a check mark. Caleb asked whether I was serious. Jonah wrote, "This is insane." Sienna did not respond for 6 hours. Then she sent, noted. One word. Calm, professional, lethal. 10 minutes later, I received an automated notification that she had opened the empty folder 14 times. The final assessment board confirmed my separation 8 days before the defense. My individual presentation would occur immediately after the original group session because the examiners were already scheduled. I would be assessed on the same learning outcomes, adjusted for individual scope. The board also opened a formal misconduct review into unauthorized copying and falsified contribution records. We were instructed not to discuss the investigation publicly. Sienna interpreted that silence as protection. Around campus, she told classmates I had had a breakdown and abandoned the project. She said the group had generously allowed me to submit a smaller individual alternative. People looked at me with curiosity in corridors. A few asked whether I was okay. One classmate advised me to apologize before I ruined my reputation. In my first life, rumors had made me frantic. I tried to correct every version of the story until I sounded defensive. This time I said only, the assessment records will show what happened. It was maddeningly effective. Sienna could fight accusations. She could not fight my refusal to perform distress. The night before the defense, no one slept. I knew because the shared platform sent notifications every time the others edited their deck. At 11:42 p.m., Jonah replaced the title slide. At 12:18 a.m., Caleb uploaded a spreadsheet called costs_final, then deleted it 3 minutes later. At 1:07 a.m., Priya added interview quotes. At 2:31 a.m., Sienna opened the transfer folder again. At 3:15 a.m., she emailed me directly. Elena, this is my final attempt to resolve this responsibly. Whatever has happened between us, presenting an empty technical folder will damage the faculty, the industry partner, and all of us. Upload the integrated materials, and we will ensure you receive prominent credit. You can still present ORCID separately. There is no reason to punish everyone. I read the message twice. Not once did she acknowledge that the materials were mine. Not once did she apologize for the hidden chat, the cropped watermarks, or the plan to lock me out. She offered me prominent credit for my own work, as though it were a gift. I typed a long response, deleted it, and sent 5 words. Use the work you completed. At 3:19 a.m., she replied, "You'll regret this." I closed my laptop and slept for 6 hours without dreaming. On the morning of the defense, the faculty building looked unnaturally bright. Glass walls reflected a hard winter sun. Students in formal clothes moved through the lobby carrying models, poster tubes, and laptops. I arrived early with 2 encrypted backups of ORCID, printed appendices, and a physical-scale model packed in foam. Dr. Farah met me outside the theater. "Nervous?" she asked. "Yes." "Good. Nervous means you understand the stakes. Fear is not the same as helplessness." She squeezed my shoulder and went inside. Through the doors, I saw Sienna arranging the group at the front. She wore a white blazer. Caleb kept wiping his palms on his trousers. Jonah was whispering at her while pointing to the laptop. Priya sat apart, staring at the floor. When Sienna noticed me, she smiled for the benefit of the room. I smiled back. Then the examiners entered. Professor Hale, Dr. Farah, an external academic, 2 engineering consultants, and a representative from the regional council whose town formed the case study. Every person whose approval Sienna had chased for 6 months took a seat facing her. Their first 5 minutes were polished. Sienna welcomed the panel and spoke about climate adaptation, community dignity, and collaborative design. Jonah advanced the slides smoothly. Priya summarized the town's demographic profile. Caleb described the proposed modular shelter in broad language that avoided numbers. If I had not known the project, I might have believed them. Then the council representative asked to see the site allocation map at full resolution. Sienna said, "Of course," and clicked the embedded link. The browser opened Elena. Approved transfer assets. The white screen appeared. This folder contains no files. Nobody reacted at first. Sienna refreshed. The same message remained. She clicked backward, opened the methodology link, and returned to the same empty folder. Jonah leaned toward the laptop and whispered, "It was supposed to populate." Caleb looked over his shoulder at me. Priya closed her eyes. Sienna faced the panel. "We appear to be experiencing a permissions issue." Professor Hale said, "The folder is accessible. The contents are not syncing." "There are no contents," Dr. Farah replied. The external examiner asked whether they had local copies. Caleb produced a USB drive. Sienna inserted it and opened a directory containing 3 spreadsheets, 2 diagrams, and a model file. For one breath, relief moved through the group. Then the first diagram appeared with the lower corner cropped. Dr. Farah asked them to zoom out. Jonas said the image had been exported that way. The examiner requested the source file. They did not have it. Caleb opened the model, but it failed to load because several linked components were missing. The cost spreadsheet contained material quantities with no formulas. The council representative asked how many shelter units could be deployed within the first 12 hours after the Eastern Bridge flooded. Caleb guessed 40. The correct figure in my model was 24, limited by truck access and assembly crews. The external examiner asked him to show the transport calculation. He opened another empty tab. That was when Sienna turned the failure into an accusation. I need to clarify that our former group member withdrew shortly before the assessment and retained key integrated files, she said, gesturing toward me. We have done our best to reconstruct the project, but the current gaps reflect an unresolved authorship dispute. Every head turned. In my first life, that moment would have destroyed me. Public attention felt like a verdict before anyone spoke. This time, Professor Hale calmly opened the assessment record. The separation was approved 8 days ago after a month-long review, he said. The group was notified in writing that independently authored files were not licensed for use. You acknowledged that notification. Sienna's mouth opened. He continued, you were also instructed to revise the presentation, so it relied only on work you could attribute and defend. Why does your deck still link repeatedly to an empty transfer folder? Sienna said she believed I had a responsibility to provide integrated materials because the work began collaboratively. Dr. Farah asked which integrated materials Sienna herself had produced. Silence. The collapse did not happen all at once. It happened question by question. The engineer asked Caleb to justify roof loading. He could not. The academic asked Priya how interview themes informed shelter placement. Priya gave an answer, then admitted the analysis had never been completed. The council representative asked Jonah why one slide cited a population figure from a different region. Jonah blamed an early draft. Dr. Farah asked Sienna to explain the decision matrix she claimed to have led. Sienna spoke for 90 seconds without naming a single criterion. Then Professor Hale displayed the task register. Red overdue markers covered the screen beside their names. He asked why completed tasks in Sienna's summary had no corresponding files. She said the register had been imposed and did not reflect informal contributions. He asked for any evidence of those contributions. She had none. Then came the interruption none of us expected. Priya stood up. Not dramatically. Her chair simply scraped against the floor, and she rose with both hands trembling. The folder isn't empty, because Elena deleted anything, she said. Sienna spun toward her. Priya looked at the examiners. It was always empty. Elena told us it would stay empty. We kept the links because Sienna thought she would upload the work at the last minute. Sit down, Sienna whispered. Priya did not. She admitted that they had created a hidden chat, uploaded placeholders, and planned to remove my access after receiving the final files. Jonah muttered, Priya, stop. She kept speaking. She said the local diagrams had come from my watermarked previews. She said they knew the structural model was incomplete. She said Sienna told them the project could not fail because I would be too afraid to let it. The room became so quiet that the ventilation system sounded like distant rain. Sienna's professional expression vanished. She's lying to save herself, she said. Professor Hale asked Priya whether she had evidence. Priya handed him the USB drive. The panel suspended the presentation. The 4 students were asked to wait outside while the examiners conferred. As they walked past me, Caleb looked stunned, Jonah furious, Priya exhausted. Sienna stopped beside my seat. For a second, I saw the woman from my first life, triumphant beneath the projector while my future disappeared. Then the image dissolved. She was just a frightened student in a white blazer who had mistaken control for competence. You planned this, she whispered. No, I said. You did. She wanted an argument, something she could use to prove I was vindictive. I gave her nothing else. Security did not drag anyone away. Nobody screamed. Real consequences are quieter. The panel later gave the group an incomplete result pending investigation. Their defense could not be assessed because they had failed to demonstrate attributable technical work. The misconduct process would determine individual outcomes. After a short break, Professor Hale called my name. I carried the physical model to the front. My knees shook as I connected my laptop, but the fear felt clean. It belonged to the work, not to humiliation. I began with a question. What happens when the safest shelter is impossible to reach? The room lifted its attention. I showed the flood sequence, then interrupted the animation at the point where the eastern bridge became impassable. Instead of presenting the shelter as a single object, I framed it as a time system: transport, labor, road access, power, sanitation, and human behavior. I demonstrated why the obvious central site failed and why 3 smaller deployment zones reduced travel risk. I opened the model live, changed rainfall intensity, and showed the route allocation update. I explained the cost assumptions, including where uncertainty remained. When the engineer challenged my roof design, I did not bluff. I identified the limitation and showed the sensitivity test. When the council representative questioned whether residents would accept the proposed locations, I used interview themes to explain the redesign of privacy partitions and family spaces. Every answer led back to evidence I had created and understood. Halfway through, the projector flickered and went black. A nervous laugh moved through the audience. In another story, that would have been disaster. I closed my laptop, walked to the physical model, and continued without slides. I removed the miniature bridge, blocked the eastern route, and repositioned the transport units by hand. This, I said, is the condition our system has to survive, not perfect technology, but disrupted information. The panel leaned forward. When the screen returned, I did not rush back to it. I finished the explanation at the model, then opened the dashboard for the final cost comparison. That failure became the strongest moment of my defense, because I had not built a presentation that depended on appearances. I had built knowledge I could carry even when the folder, screen, or software vanished. The questions lasted 42 minutes. When they ended, the external examiner thanked me and said my attribution record was unusually rigorous. The engineer asked whether I would consider developing the deployment model further with their resilience team. The council representative requested permission to share my route analysis with their emergency planning office. Professor Hale did not apologize for my first life. He could not remember it. But when he said, "Your decision to separate was academically justified," something inside me finally loosened. I received the highest individual capstone mark that year. Dr. Farah later nominated Orchid for the Faculty Innovation Award. The consultancy that had once hired Sienna offered me a graduate role instead. I did not accept immediately. In my first life, I would have grabbed it as proof that I had won. In my second, I asked about supervision, authorship policies, and workload boundaries before deciding. The misconduct findings arrived 6 weeks later. Sienna was found responsible for falsifying contribution records, directing unauthorized use of my work, and misleading the assessment panel. Her capstone enrollment was terminated, with permission to reapply the following year under individual supervision. Caleb failed the technical component, but was allowed to resubmit because the evidence showed incompetence and concealment, not leadership of the scheme. Jonah received a fail and a formal integrity sanction for cropping attribution marks and using unsupported data. Priya received a reduced mark and a warning. Her late disclosure did not erase her participation, but it mattered. She wrote me an apology that did not ask for forgiveness. I respected that more than tears at my door. We never became friends. Sienna appealed. In her statement, she said the punishment ignored the pressures of group assessment and the emotional harm caused by my strategic withdrawal. She argued that I had allowed the group to believe I would eventually provide the files. The board cited my written notice, her acknowledgement, and the 14 access logs showing she repeatedly opened the empty folder after being told it would remain empty. Her appeal failed. The last time I saw her was outside Professor Hale's office. She looked tired, stripped of the polished certainty that had made everyone follow her. Was it worth it, she asked. I knew what she meant. Was protecting my work worth for people failing? Was being right worth becoming feared? Was a boundary still moral when other people crashed into it? I thought about the woman I had been, awake at 3 in the morning repairing their future, while mine disappeared. Yes, I said. Not because I wanted her ruined, because the alternative was volunteering to be erased. Months later, I opened the transfer folder one final time. It was still empty except for the original notice. I considered deleting it, then changed my mind. I renamed it The Work You Completed and kept it in my archive. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. In my first life, I believed an empty folder meant I had failed to provide enough, help enough, anticipate enough, forgive enough. In my second, I learned that emptiness could be evidence. It could show exactly what remained when my labor was removed from people who claimed they had never needed it. The folder had not humiliated them. It had simply stopped hiding them. People later told the story, as if I had engineered a spectacular revenge. They said I waited until the final day, pulled the files, and watched my group collapse before every examiner. That version was cleaner, sharper, and almost completely wrong. I did not pull their work.
Eu withdrew mine.
I did not empty their folder. I created a place for approved shared assets, and they contributed nothing worth placing inside it. I did not force them to present from an empty link. I warned them, in writing, that it would stay empty. They clicked it anyway because they could not imagine a world in which I meant no. That was the real rebirth. It was not waking 6 months earlier with memories of betrayal. It was the moment I understood that I did not have to destroy the people who used me. I only had to stop building the stage beneath their feet. On the day of the final assessment, every examiner saw the blank screen, but I saw something else. I saw the exact shape of my absence. For once, it belonged to me.